Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the channel where we ask the question, who was Charles Manson? And so today we're going to be talking about one of the most dangerous and one of the bloodiest cults in history. Charles Manson was a cult leader who led the Manson family in the late 1960s. He was born on the 12th of November, 1934, to 15-year-old Kathleen Manson. Manson moved to McMeshin, West Virginia to live with his aunt and uncle, while his mother was arrested for assault and robbery. She was paroled in 1942, and Manson recalls that the 2 weeks that his mother returned from prison were the happiest time of his life. Charles and his mother moved to Indianapolis, where at the age of 13 he was placed into Gibault School for Boys, which was a strict school where students were beaten with a wooden paddle as a punishment. Manson would run away from Gibault and live on his own. He'd steal from convenience stores for food and sleep anywhere he could find shelter. Eventually, Manson was caught for his petty crimes, and a judge sent him to a juvenile facility in Omaha, Nebraska. There, Manson escaped the facility with another student named Blackie Nelson. They obtained a gun and stole a car and committed 2 armed robberies on their way to Nelson's uncle's home in Peoria, Illinois. Nelson's uncle was a professional thief and took them both on as apprentices. During a nighttime raid, Manson was caught and, after an investigation, was charged for the 2 armed robberies and the car theft that occurred on his way to Peoria. He was sent to Indiana Boys School, where he was repeatedly beaten and raped by other students. Manson developed his own self-defense technique he called the crazy game, where if he couldn't defend himself, he would flail his arm around, scream, and wail as if he was crazy. Manson escaped with 2 other students in 1951 and tried running away to California in stolen cars. They were arrested in Utah for driving across state lines in a stolen vehicle. Manson was sent to National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. When given an aptitude test, Manson was found to be illiterate but had an above-average IQ of 109. He was released for good behavior in 1954 to live with his aunt and uncle in McMeshin. At the age of 21, Manson married Rosalie Jean Willis and moved to Los Angeles in a stolen car from Ohio. Manson was charged again for taking a stolen vehicle across state lines and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Rosalie gave birth to their child, Charles Manson Jr., during his first year of imprisonment. Rosalie and his mother occasionally visited Manson, but his mother told him that Rosalie was living with another man. Manson tried escaping prison with a stolen car, but was caught and given 5 years probation, 2 weeks before his parole hearing. In 1958, Manson received 5 years parole and divorced Rosalie Jean Willis. He later married a young woman named Leona. Manson took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for prostitution purposes. For this, Manson would be arrested and he would stay in prison until 1967, where he was scheduled for an early release. However, Manson had spent more than half of his life inside prisons and facilities to which he asked to stay because he felt as though prison was his only home. After being released from prison in March 1967, he would move to San Francisco, where he attended multiple Scientology meetings. Manson began to collect a small, devoted group of followers that were interested in the whole hippie alternative culture. The hippie counterculture was an advocate for free love, which Manson exploited by sexually taking advantage of his female followers. Manson was active in the Ashbury district of San Francisco, which was a booming hotspot for the hippie community. He established himself as a religious figure and attracted a group of around 100 devoted followers. As you can imagine, this was the founding of the cult. The group called themselves the Family, but the media deemed them the Manson family. Manson would teach his followers that they were the reincarnations of the original Christians from when Christ was alive. He also taught that the 1960s era U.S. establishment was the reincarnation of the Roman Empire. Many of Manson's followers believed that he himself was the second coming of Jesus Christ. Manson started to form valuable connections in Hollywood, including Al Lewis, who let Manson babysit his kids on a few occasions. Universal producer Gary Stromberg set up Manson for a recording session. However, Stromberg described Manson as unprepared and untalented. A valuable connection of Manson was Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, who let Manson and the family live in his home in exchange for sexual favors from Manson's female followers. However, Wilson's manager evicted the family, so they were forced to move to Spawn Movie Ranch, a popular spot where westerns were filmed. Again, they offered sexual favors to the owner of the ranch in exchange of their stay. Dennis Wilson would introduce Manson to a friend of his, Terry Melcher, who was the son of Doris Day and a record producer. Terry Melcher was hesitant in giving Manson a record deal, but he was friendly with him and the family. Because Melcher delayed signing Manson a record deal, Manson's relationship with Wilson began to sour, with Manson allegedly threatening to kill Wilson. Melcher grew more frightened by Manson and told him that he was not getting a record deal. Melcher's mother, Doris Day, convinced Melcher to move out of his home in 10050 Cello Drive to stay away from Manson. But the basic gist of it is, the Beatles knew that Jesus Christ had been reborn in Los Angeles, and that they wanted Manson to create an album that would set off a certain event. This was a doomsday event preached by Manson called Helter Skelter. The Manson family planned to release an album that would attract hippie women to join the group. Preached by Manson, as a result, black men will be deprived of the woman that the political changes of the 60s had brought them. Manson preached that a great racial war would commence between the blacks and the whites, where the blacks would rise up against the whites, taking to the streets of downtown Los Angeles and other cities, murdering, stabbing, shooting white people, and smearing their blood on walls. Thus, an apocalyptic war would commence, killing nearly 2/3 of the world population and collapsing society, and the whites being slaughtered and the blacks ruling the world. The Manson family would have little to fear because a pit will open in Death Valley, which they will enter into a forgotten cave of milk and honey with spring water running through. A city that they will build until the war is over. Once the whites have all been killed off, leaving the blacks unable to lead, Manson will rise above all into his own kingdom. Manson drew a lot of the scenario from the Book of Revelation, chapter 9, which Manson connected to the Beatles song from the White Album, Revolution 9. Manson thought that he was the fifth angel given the key to the bottomless pit, this pit being the entrance to the forgotten cave that the family will hide in during Helter Skelter. Verse 7, their faces were like human faces, and verse 8, their hair like woman's hair, refers to the Beatles and the Beatles having long hair. Verse 9 also says they had breastplates of iron, which Manson interpreted that the Beatles' breastplates were their steel guitars. Verse 17 it says, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. According to Manson, the fire, smoke, and sulfur were the music that the Beatles would sing. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God in their foreheads. Manson interprets verse 4 that it is wrong to hurt any living thing other than humans, to which Manson would lash out at followers that would kill things like rattlesnakes. From verse 15 of chapter 9, so the four angels who had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. Manson interpreted verse 15 that the blacks would rise above the whites, killing them, and leaving 2/3 of the population. Sharon Tate was a famous actress in Hollywood known for her roles in films such as The Wrecking Crew and The Valley of Dolls. Tate was married to film director Roman Polanski, whom she was pregnant with a boy. Tate had moved into 10050 Cello Drive, the same house Terry Melcher lived in before he moved out. Tate's first encounter with Manson was in March 1969 when he approached their residence. Manson thought that Melcher was still living in the residence while he was not aware that he moved to Malibu to avoid him. Manson was approached by Shiroko Hatami, who was a photographer there to photograph Tate before she left to Rome the next day. Manson may have been asking for Terry Melcher, which was a name that Hatami didn't recognize. Tate would come behind Hatami asking who was at the door, to which Hatami told Tate it was some guy who was looking for someone. On the night of August 8th, 1969, Sharon Tate declined an invitation to a dinner party and decided to enjoy a quick meal at her favorite restaurant, El Coyote, with her friends Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, and his girlfriend, Abigail Folger. Tate was 8 months pregnant with a boy and was still waiting for the return of her husband, Roman Polanski, who was in Europe to film a movie. The caretaker of the house, William Garretson, was in a cottage behind the house. That night, Charles Manson directed a group of his followers to go to the former residence of Terry Melcher on 0050 Cello Drive. The group consisted of Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Kernwinkel. It was now after midnight on August 9th when Tex Watson climbed a telephone pole and cut the line to the house. Watson entered the house through a window and let the other three in through the front door. Watson awoke Frykowski, who was sleeping on the couch. Frykowski asked Watson, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" To which Watson replied, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." Watson found the other three occupants of the house and forced them into the living room where he tied them up with a Watson found the other three occupants of the house and forced them into the living room where he tied Tate and Sebring together with a rope by their necks. Sebring began to protest the treatment of Tate, so Watson shot and stabbed him 7 times. Sharon Tate was stabbed 16 times in the back and chest. She reportedly begged the murderers to spare the life of her unborn child, but Atkins would scream back at her, "I don't care about you or your baby." Folger went back to the bedroom to get her purse and handed the murderers $70. Frykowski escaped bondage and made his way to the front porch into the yard. However, Watson caught up to him and shot him in the front yard of the house. Folger also attempted escaping through the back bedroom door, but was caught and stabbed 28 times on the lawn. This was the final killing of the Tate murders. That morning, the maid would return for house cleaning duties, but found the word "pigs" written on the front door in Sharon Tate's own blood. The maid entered the house and saw the bodies sprawled around the house. The first and most obvious suspect was William Garretson, the caretaker of the house, and the only person alive at the scene. However, since he spent the night in the cottage at the back of the house, he was spared of the murders and, because of the loud music he was playing, unable to hear what was going on. On that next night, August 10th, 1969, Charles Manson himself would be accompanied by Tex Watson, Patricia Kernwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten to murder again. The victims were Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Leno was found with 26 stab wounds, 12 with a knife and 14 with a large fork. The word "war" was carved into his flesh, and the fork was found still protruding from his neck. The words "Rise" and "Death to Pigs" were written in blood on the walls. Patricia misspelled "Helter Skelter" on the refrigerator, the same refrigerator that they enjoyed milk and sandwiches from after the killings. The family went back to Spahn Movie Ranch to prepare for Helter Skelter, but eventually, the police would raid the ranch and Manson was arrested on October 12, 1969. This event the family called Maxwell's Silver Hammer, after the Beatles song. The members that took part in the killings were sentenced to life, and some are still rotting in prison to this day. The memory of the Manson family will forever haunt Hollywood, and the name Charles Manson may send blood-curdling chills to anyone that may hear it. Hey man, I just really wanted to say how happy I am that you made it all the way to the end of the video. I mean, that's pretty crazy. You must have really liked it a lot. This one, it was a real project. It's about 2:55 now, and well, I guess I'll be heading to bed now that it's over. So, I, who cares? I mean, I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye, folks.